The most common questions I've been asked about my early access experience with this wonderful game, Age of Wonders 4, have been things like, is it worth it? Is it fun? Is it difficult to pick up? Confusing? Is it replayable? Well, in this video I'm going to cover off all of that. Here are my honest impressions of my experience so far with Age of Wonders 4. Now, what you need to know first off is that I've had access for many weeks now. Early or mid-March I got access because I was making some of the official tutorial videos. These videos, well, one of them that you're seeing on your screen right now for the Age of Wonders channel. And so I've had the pleasure, and it has been a pleasure, of playing Age of Wonders for quite some time now. Here are my thoughts, broken down, of course, into categories with time cards below. First up, how does it actually play? What is it exactly? And I've covered that off already in my review video, which I'm fairly happy with as far as being happy with your own content goes. And I'd encourage you to check that out if you're wondering what is Age of Wonders 4, because it really, I think, answers that question quite well. But at its core, it's a 4X game. It's about exploring a map, potentially exterminating opponents. It's a core game that involves building a civilization, building an empire made up of cities or their baby version outposts, and expanding across an unknown map. There are, of course, many customization options. We'll get to that a little bit later in the video. It is also based around key mechanics inside of its combat system, right? So beyond the food and the industry and the production, the science, all of those normal yields that you would expect in this kind of strategy game, although science is here called knowledge, it has a combat system as well. The combat system, though, instead of mimicking the likes of, say, Civilization 6 or Humankind or Endless Legend, indeed, might be an even better example in terms of being a strategy game and a 4X game. In terms of its combat, it plays, or at least most people have turned up to the streams and commented that it looks a bit like Total War, right? You jump down into a battlefield that is based on the map, beautifully rendered with hazards and all sorts of things on it, and then you engage in turn-based combat, where the upgrades that you've got through your science tree, etc., play out. How does it actually play, though? What are my real impressions here? Well, I think that manual fighting, which is what you're seeing me do here at the start of this fight anyway, is pretty satisfying. Using a combination of spells and units, you lead a fight just like I'm doing here. It also gives you the option to speed up the time so the units will move faster, fight faster, and switch to auto-deploy at any moment, or surrender if you'd rather. The manual combat is decent, but potentially slightly cumbersome at first because of the sheer number of abilities and attacks that you're going to unlock. A large manual fight could take some time. Speaking of which, large manual fights are generally limited. In fact, any fights are limited to 18 versus 18. So that's the current maximum that's available. And I think your graphics card would potentially thank you for that, because at its maximum end, it does struggle just a little bit. Although, to be fair, I'm playing it at 8 times speed and I'm recording it at the same time, so my experience may differ from yours. The auto combat, though, I'm pleased to say, is actually surprisingly good. Don't get me wrong, it can't mimic the human brain. If these guys could do that, they would probably be focusing on other things. But it does a really good job at behaving competently. Not always, but generally speaking, it's pretty good. The auto combat and auto resolve functions both work incredibly well. It's decent at what it does. And overall, the combat system is brilliant and supported by this. The hero system, the equipment system, because of course as you move around the map, you're picking up different kinds of gear, perhaps you're looting it from perished foes or finding it in ancient wonders, and it all bleeds together into a wonderful combat system, supported by that overarching system of research or knowledge, where you move through a set of tomes, progressively leveling up from tome 1 right the way up to tier 5, and that unlocks new units, new combat spells, upgrades for your race even. The customization options are incredible, and you would never get through it all in one game. And then you jump back to this screen, where I'm managing my city, choosing the next tiles I want to get, and the kind of improvements I want to put on them. To conclude this section on how it actually plays, I would say that this 4X, this core city building, empire building state of the game is brilliant. It works really well. The improvements make sense. Expansion favors things like knowledge and food, and your cities rely on production and draft to keep producing things. You build units at the same time that you build buildings, which just makes sense. And overall, it's a really solid 4X experience. If you just are focused on 4X games or strategy games at their core, I think you'll really enjoy how it actually plays. Next up, AI and diplomacy. It's solid inside of combat, the AI, as I've already mentioned. And outside of it, I've noticed some interesting behaviors. Has it been perfect? No. Would there be times where I'd want to call in my, say, city-state allies units to bring them in for a fight, but they're not bringing them and I can't do that as their overlord? Yeah, there have been some times like that. But it has displayed some pretty interesting mechanics. One time when I was fighting an enemy, getting ready to go and besiege their city, my city-state friend took their units and started running around and pillaging all of the enemy's tile improvements, the territory improvements. There are other examples like that too, where I found the AI's been very good at what it does. Most importantly, when it moves units around, whether it be to take a city or to fight you in open combat, it's quite careful about how it picks a fight. It won't just step out somewhere stupid and take it, generally speaking. And it also won't tend to just march 1 or 2 units around the map for literally no reason. It moves its armies together collectively and seems to have some kind of cohesive strategy. It matters in this game even more than other strategy games, because here, your allies can share in your victory, or at least you don't need to completely wipe them out to win. So if you're going for a domination victory, where you need to take down all of the enemy's throne cities and make sure that their leaders perished at the same time, if you have an ally, that's fine. You win with them. And I really like that. It's refreshing. And of course, would work in the same way that you would expect a multiplayer alliance to work. The AI and diplomacy, of course, aren't relevant at all to multiplayer. And as a quick note, I can't speak to its performance here either. When I reflect more generally on strategy games and their multiplayer, I think about kind of a bit of a mixed bag. It can be a little bit difficult, but that one, like I say, we'll have to wait and see. Overall, I think that the AI is pretty good at what it does. When you engage in diplomacy as well, outside of that combat, outside of map dynamics, it seems to do a pretty good job at respecting alliances or wars, and also giving you a forewarning about what it's thinking. You'll receive a message a few turns before something goes wrong, so the AI can let you know, hey, I don't like cities that sell grievances, and you guys are selling a lot of grievances, for example. It's pretty good. I think it's better than average. Again, not groundbreaking, it's not the human brain, but I think it does a very good job, and I've enjoyed playing against it. Perhaps at the highest end, it might need to be scaled up just a little bit more. Next, I'd like to talk about Age of Wonders 4 and the question around replayability, because that's a big one when you're thinking about, is this worth its price? A price that I would note has moved up a little bit in terms of previous entries, but perhaps you should expect that in a highly inflationary environment. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the last section of the video. Here, I want to touch a little bit on the customization. Customization in Age of Wonders 4 is something that is generally, in strategy games, unparalleled. It's incredible. Right from the word go, of course, here with the creation of a realm, and then as you move through, the creation of your race. Not just what they look like, though. This isn't just cosmetics. Here, in the world that I'm playing at, in the gameplay that's been playing throughout the video, I've selected quite a sort of a burning, desolate world, fueled and inhabited by undead monsters. But you don't have to play that at all. You could play an Arctic world. You could play a world full of fauna, megafauna, and prosperous islands. We've experienced a lot of those worlds already here on the channel on stream. I'd encourage you, by the way, to subscribe if you haven't already. We're reaching for the moon. Not the stars, just the moon. Moving swiftly along. I think that there's some potential in the game's difficulty and replayability where certain tomes or potentially units are just not balanced. And that, of course, impacts the difficulty a little bit because it leads to potentially quite random things happening, where you can go from being behind to massively ahead because you happen to luck upon a combo, or the enemy, who knows its combos pretty well, masters it, and you get absolutely done. However, a game with this much customization, which is what ultimately replayability is about, Not just customizing the world when you start or your race, though that will impact you for the rest of the game, at least in terms of your affinities. It's more about the sort of overall thing that this is just such a big game with huge replayability as you move through, including, of course, world building and story building. Because you're not just making a race. As you move through, you'll meet friends, potentially foes, most likely foes, but also you'll be drawn into lots of different story events. Your city-state ally, the leader of that city, might call on you to go and slay a spider that's been tormenting them since they were a child. And you'll get the backstory along with it. You'll, of course, be presented with rewards. And it goes along well with the continuous events that play out in that whole storyline, from when you just meet them to when they are your flourishing vassal. And that's kind of just one example. There are lots of little examples of what I might call side quest stories. Are they going to ultimately lead to your domination victory, or your magic, or your expansion victory? Well, they might help, but ultimately probably not. But what they are is a part of story building. It's a part of building a world, because they'll also shape your direction in certain ways, as will, of course, your affinities, how you've upgraded your species, for example, if you decide to go with the Spawnkin minor race upgrade like I did. The kind of heroes you pull in, all of it comes together for, I think, a very replayable experience. We've already touched on difficulty a little bit. I think it's fairly well balanced. The key here, though, for me, is not just to touch on balance, but actually to answer that question, is it too difficult for a new player? Or is it challenging for someone who hasn't played Age of Wonders, the series, very much, if at all? And I can actually answer both of these questions from quite a bit of personal experience, like the rest of this video. I think that first and foremost, this game is not too difficult to pick up, right? I mean, if you're a total dum-dum, it might be a little bit difficult, but I'm kidding. Generally speaking, it's pretty easy to pick up. The tutorials and the tooltips, the information that's built into the game is very good. There's also lots of great tutorials on YouTube. Hoi, 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 there is. And then, moreover though, after you get through that tutorial phase, the game does a really good job at taking quite complex things and making them fairly simple. The territory management is a great example, right? You get one extra territory per population, and then you choose from a nice little colorful selection of 2 or 3 things to build. There's some strategy to it, though, don't get me wrong. There's boosted buildings where you need, say, 3 farms to get a boosted whatever. But at its core, I think it's quite easy to pick up. Moreover, I don't think you need to worry if you haven't played much Age of Wonders before, because neither had I. And while I will admit, in my honest impressions, because this is, of course, what this video is about, at first, I felt quite overwhelmed. I looked at the sheer number of tomes and all of the spells within them. And then I realized that was just tier 1, right? Those 12 tomes, that's just tier 1. There's 60 or whatever unlocks just in that tier alone. And then you move through to a new tier and you're like, oh my goodness, it just keeps going. Combine that with potentially a character customizer that has so many features it could be a little overwhelming. I can understand and empathize with a player who turns up and thinks, whoa, this is a lot. But I can also say fairly comfortably that firstly, you don't need to worry so much about that, because as you move through the character selector at the start and choose your race and choose your traits and even choose your tome, the next time you choose a tome, you can just choose something completely different and then stick with that completely different thing for the rest of the game. You're not pinned in by the decisions that you make at the start. Will it give you an advantage if you've planned ahead? Of course. But spoiler alert, you're not playing at the 2023 championships. I think you'll be all right. And I really mean that. I don't think it is as overwhelming as it could potentially seem. And also, as somebody who hasn't played a whole lot of Age of Wonders until Age of Wonders 4, in which my playtime vastly eclipses the rest of the franchise combined easily, I can safely say that Age of Wonders 4 is not too difficult to pick up. It's manageable, and it's pretty fun in the phase of discovery, a phase that seems to last a very long time. Next up, let's talk the 2 P's. It's performance and problems. I've bundled them together because they both start with P, and potentially they could be one and the same with one of these points. First and foremost, I think overall performance has been pretty good. Full disclosure, I have a fairly high-end system. I'm running fairly high-end specs. I would expect performance to be good, and it was. Will it perform well on low-end systems? I'm unsure, but one thing to note is that it is releasing on console right from the word go. No, hey, we're releasing it on console, and it just doesn't happen. No, console's coming, and it just indefinitely delayed. It's coming day one. It's here. It'll be there. I've played the game on PC with a controller, and I personally thought, for what it's worth, for the record, I play strategy games almost exclusively on PC, but for what it's worth, the controller controls seem to be really good. I couldn't fault them. I thought this is a great console version. It doesn't feel like a port that's been ripped from PC and slapped into console. So perhaps there's some optimism for lower end systems. Of course, acknowledging that it's much easier, generally speaking, to code a game for console because all PS5s are the same, all low-end PCs are not. With that aside, I did notice a few issues, a couple of performance gripes, a bit of hitching in the end game, dropping of frames, particularly around the end turn cycle, which was also, as you might expect, a bit slower than quite a bit slower than the start. And then the other thing was sort of zooming in and out of the map, from the normal map view into the tactical map view. Just a couple of frames seem to drop each time. Again, I don't know if these issues will be on everyone's system or whether it's just a me problem, but I thought I'd mention them here in the performance area anyway, because it's something that people have asked me quite a bit about on stream. The honest answer is, I don't know about low-end systems. I haven't played it on one. I do know it's coming to console. Perhaps that's an option for you. And I know it's run very well on my system, particularly in the last few weeks in a version that I assume will be the release version. There may even be a release day patch on this one. I honestly don't know. But it's performed very well recently. Very well. In terms of problems, they are fairly few and far between. In my review, I called it a Game of the Year contender, obviously in the strategy game category. Let's not kid ourselves. We're playing strategy games after all. But I do think it's a really solid Game of the Year contender. One of the best, if not the best strategy game to have released so far in this year. And I'm optimistic that it at least deserves a nomination for those kinds of awards. That aside, there are, of course, gripes, not only with those hitching frame drop issues that I talked about earlier, but other things. Few but occasional quality of life issues. My trade routes expire after 10 turns. I'd love to be able to auto-renew those, considering they're with city-states, and the city-state will never, literally never, cancel or be able to destroy the trade route unless they are taken over by someone else, declare war on you, that kind of thing. It's not a physical unit. It can't be cancelled. So it'd be wonderful if I could choose to auto-roll that over, or at least have a notification that would allow me to do so. Other little things. I find it difficult to select a unit when it's sitting on top of a city. I can't really select its banner. I try and click the unit, but I'm accidentally clicking the city or the tile or whatever. A couple of little gripes like that come up time and time again, but don't tend to disrupt me that much from my overall gameplay experience. Like I say, Age of Wonders 4, I think, is a really fun game. And then finally on problems, I think that the proof will ultimately be in the pudding here, because I am only one person. When I look across the reviews, however, I see people broadly agreeing with me about different things and in different contexts, but generally speaking, Age of Wonders 4 has reviewed very well by critics. Around 8 or 9 out of 10 is the general score it's been given. And I think, personally, that's completely fair, though I stay away from giving numerical values in my reviews. And that brings me to my point. The real proof will be when everyone gets their hands on it. So if after listening to most of this video, and I will get to my sort of summary and should I buy at the end here in just a moment, but if you've listened through this video, firstly, thank you. You're rare. And secondly, I think that if you're still on the fence, you might want to just wait and see what the public criticism is as well, right? Because as we know from movie reviews, sometimes the critics and their one-off experiences as individuals can differ wildly when something is thrown out into the public. Finally, should I buy? Honestly, I think the answer is yes. You probably should. Of course, it's your money, your decision, your budget, not mine. But I think that Age of Wonders 4 is a really special strategy game with replayability and fun and interest and so much diversity inside of its research, its text, its spells, its units. And it's creation of the world and of the species within it. I think it performs well and it delivers a really solid experience, not just for general strategy gamers, but it may even pull people in who don't often play fantasy or sci-fi or other genres, me perhaps included in that group. Thank you very much for watching my thoughts on Age of Wonders 4. I've got plenty more coverage where that came from because I genuinely think this is a pretty fun game. I'll see you next time.